All right. Well, just to start things off, I wanted to say, thank you, Zamir and Alan, for the work you've done on this iteration. I really appreciate it. I think we've got, some really good ideas coming together, and I'm really excited to see what you've done. Just wanted to have a synchronous discussion here because I felt like, the points I had we've been a lot to go back and forth in the issues. Um, so just to start off, I'm happy to vocalize the points that I've got in here. I wanted to make sure, as part of this proposal, there's a very long list of technologies in the list. I didn't count them up, but maybe 10 or more, right? Even if we end up not using every single item in the list, it still is shaping up to be a lot of different things that we're putting together. And I want to make sure that we can present this to the end user as a single, GitLab solution. Like this is your GitLab container protection solution, container host protection solution. And that we can abstract that a little bit away where they don't have to think and worry about, well, I'm using AppArmor here and Falco here and what all of the different pieces are doing, or even what the components are under the hood. Certainly if they want to know, we can make that information available, but they shouldn't have to have that deep knowledge to get started using the feature. So there are 3 areas that I called out in my list that we would want to make sure to abstract that away. So installation and management, policy management, and logs and alerts. And I ended up deciding to move the policy management discussion to the end just because I want to show you some of my long-term thinking there. And I'm worried that that could just take over the entire discussion and the time that we have today. But I just wanted to sync up with the 2 of you and make sure that you are comfortable that we're going to be able to make this abstracted from the end user and make it feel like a single, just one solution in the UI. Are there any concerns with that? Comments?
I think having the policy kind of centralized, I think it's a good idea for the user. And we could start like with very few options, and it's going to be like a customization that's going to be transparent for the user to each configuration it's going to, each solution shouldn't be a big deal. It's just a work of its own, but I understand that that's exactly the point that you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, and that's fine if there's extra work required. I just want to make sure we're not painting ourselves into a corner, so to speak, right? Where we're picking technologies that are not going to work with that long-term vision. Okay, I know there were some comments around the logs and alerts. So just to follow up on that one, I agree there's a few different points there that we would want to consider. One is where you configure the logs to go out to syslog. Alerts also, I guess we didn't talk about that much in the discussion ahead of this meeting, but alerts would be a little bit different from logging. So, logging, you may have everything go out to logging. You may only want to actually be alerted when something bad happens. And so, we haven't really dealt with alerting yet in mod security or Cilium. We haven't built any alerting capabilities yet, but that is another thing that I've got on my roadmap that we'll want to consider down the road. So, unifying the way that those come in, again, so that it looks and feels like it came from GitLab's container host protection solution rather than, this came from AppArmor and this came from, and just, the customer's going to look at that. And if we haven't made it clear that we're even using AppArmor, they're going to scratch their head and say, wait, what? Or, why are all these logs formatted differently? Or, why do I have to go set this up in 3 different places? As long as we can, make that a little bit more seamless of an experience to the end user down the road. I understand that may take some additional work. I just don't want us to get in a position where we're stuck later.
Yeah, so I think I agree with almost all of that. One place to configure where the logs should go. You don't want to configure logs for AppArmor in a separate place than Cilium, in a separate place than WAF, and then a separate place than, et cetera. I think that's very clear and obvious that we should do that. I hadn't thought about alerting, but not recently at least. But that's a really good point that we need to consider that. Probably not specific to container behavior analytics, although track it, of course, as part of that, but in general. The part, so there also, if we can avoid it, there shouldn't be, one place to add anything that is needed to enable logging and alerting. So not Fluentd here and Fluentd here and Fluentd here, but if it's one, maybe just there's a click add Fluentd, or maybe when you configure logging, it adds Fluentd, to wherever it's needed or something along those lines. So not just the configuration, but the installation should also be in one place and perhaps be done one time. The only place I potentially disagree is on the log format. Each tool will have its own format, and there should be some things that are in common between them, like the timestamp, like which container, if it's container specific, because it might be Kubernetes, infrastructure specific, which container it is. If there's a user involved, which are, the events may or may not be for a user, the user should be clearly indicated. If there's a process involved, the process, or there's a file involved, we should try to standardize some, but each tool is going to have its own logging format. So what I would recommend is we initially getting all the logs going to one place with one place to configure it. And then we later work on log standardization iteratively over time to make it as close as possible between the different solutions, whether it's behavior analytics or Cilium or WAF or whatever. We kind of iteratively improve that. Trying to do that in V1. I'm not saying you're trying to do this in the first release, but that's a lot more work than just getting the logs to one place.
No, I understand that. And priority wise, I don't know that we would get to that anytime this year. I just want to make sure that we're not picking a technology that, we can't do that for some reason. I just want to keep our options open down the road. Even before we start messing with the keys in the list of things, we'd want to make sure, for example, that they're all like outputting in JSON format, for example, which maybe all of them already are. But if they're not, do we have the flexibility to convert it into JSON format, for example? Not suggesting we take on this work for the MVC by any stretch of the imagination, or even in the next 12 months. I just, we're picking technologies here. This is a big decision. I want to make sure we're picking something that's going to work for us all the way through.
Awesome. It makes a lot of sense to me. What does everybody else think?
Yeah, I understand why we need to have that. I believe all the tools that we proposed and that we are currently using are supporting JSON output format. So we can then adapt it to be, let's say, more GitLab way or something like that. Then we'll have to work probably with Splunk and other CM providers and tools just to make sure that people can export from GitLab to those tools and be able to filter through them and so on. So definitely, I believe all the tools we have are already supporting that. So we just need to at some point take a look at all of the logs we have and try to normalize them.
Okay. And as long as we're able to do that, then I'm good for now. It's okay if we don't do that, please. Okay,
Sam,
so it sounds like, yeah, go ahead, Felipe.
I think Felipe was talking.
Yeah, okay, really quick. I just wanted to make sure that I understand what's exactly the difference between an alert and the log entry. Because to me, that's exactly the same thing.
By the way, as we go, we have a great discussion. We're recording. We didn't do this in a previous discussion, so can someone nominate a volunteer to take notes on what we discussed and decided, so that Thiago and Arthur can read them in addition to watching the recording?
I can try.
Thanks, Samir.
Yeah, I'm
next
happy to
time,
type when I'm not talking. I just
time.
I can't type and talk at the same time, so I can take notes when other people are talking. But
Zamir volunteered this time. We'll make sure it's not Zamir next time. Somebody else will volunteer. Thanks, Zamir. Okay. Sorry, please continue.
Yeah, so the difference between a log and alert, this is pretty common. So logs, you may send a lot of things out via logs. You may send you may want to log when a policy, any policy is violated, almost regardless of the severity that happens. Alerting is a little bit different, where an alert would be generated when there's actually an incident or a violation of concern to the end user. So there is a difference between logging and alerting, where alerting would show up in some kind of, a dashboard or a workflow where the security analyst could go through and review those alerts and either clear them or approve them. Logging is going to be used in a much wider sense, where you're just trying to capture the logs and store them off somewhere in case you need to go back and do troubleshooting. The use case there is not necessarily there's been something of concern, but just something that I want to record for future reference. So your logs you would typically have sent out to a SIM, whereas alerts you would actually want to have some kind of daily workflow where you go through and review those items of concern. Maybe those are things that you don't actually want to block, but if they happen, you do want to go in and know about them and review them. Whereas the volume of logs is just going to be so large that you're going to have no way to go through and review everything. So there's kind of just a difference in the volume and severity and importance there. And what things are logged and what things are alerted on are defined by policy. I guess we'll cover that a little bit more when we get to the policy management piece. Again, right now we haven't dealt with alerts to this point. So I guess for this team, it's a little bit of a newer concept, but in the security industry, it's common to have those two separated.
And Sam, do you mind if I ask a question that's a little bit out of the scope of the logging and alert for now?
Sure.
I was thinking that are we considering that in the future that we're going to feed this data back to GitLab, like in terms of vulnerability or something, so then they can be further processed like as an issue or come down as a part of the circle?
Yes, absolutely. All right, so unless there's more comments or questions on point A, I want to move on to point B. So again, this doesn't necessarily have to be done today, but we've run into this issue like with mod security, for example. We want to make sure that we can decouple our use of these products from required use of CI/CD and Auto DevOps. And specifically, it's not that we can't use CI/CD or Auto DevOps at all. It's that we want to be able to let the security team work independently of the development and DevOps team, regardless of where they're at in their adoption journey. So if the security team uses CI, that's fine, as long as it doesn't require it to be used by the development team or step on the development team's toes, regardless of what technology they're using. So I just want to see as well, is there anything that would prevent us from meeting these use cases with these technologies? And then the second question would be, is there anything we can do in our initial MVC implementation to save ourselves rework later? Can we meet these use cases out of the gate or plan on that as we're designing the MVC?
And Sam, thank you for adding the write-up on exactly what you're looking for here, or more, double clicking on the use case. I think that would actually help with the issue that Philippe is researching on, in general, using the container security solutions, whether it's behavior analytics or the other ones like WAF or network policies, et cetera, in this kind of mode. So I think it's great to consider that for this. I'd say if either you or Philippe can actually add that to that issue, that'd be great, because it really helps to paint the picture
I did
of
that.
what you're looking for.
I did that.
Awesome.
So those are on there. I added it to the description.
Yeah, it really helped to clarify in my mind what you're looking for. It makes a lot of sense to me. Other than that, I didn't have any other comments.
So yeah, Zamir, Alan, Philippe, thoughts, feedback, like, are we okay with the technologies that we picked? Are we not okay? Is this, again, like, even if we don't meet that out of the gate, that's okay. I just want to make sure that we're going to be able to support this in the future.
Yeah, I believe with the technologies we choose, it is possible to. It's all about the deployment, not about the technologies itself, but how to deploy it. I don't know if the new way of installing apps like through GitLab CI/CD, so you just have a YAML file and you specify which applications you would like to install in your cluster, and it will be installed without thinking about, like, okay, you still have to have the project, But in that project, there's only needs to have a YAML file with certain fields enabled that you'd like to install, either like FluentD or Cilium or Ingress. So I do believe it's possible, but I'm not fully sure if I understand the GitLab CI/CD apps yet. But while looking at the design and how it works, it looks like it is possible.
Yeah, to be honest, on my side, I haven't looked at all of this. We had a discussion, I think, Alan, like a couple of weeks ago about this, but I will definitely take a deeper look at this. I don't see anything that is problematic to me, but I want to make sure that we think about all the blind spots. Like, for example, I see NATs that would be used with kubeless. I don't have any problem with NATs itself because it's something very lightful and performant, but just want to make sure that we're not introducing any security issue with that, because as far as I know, there is no authentication with NATs. So that means if anyone in the cluster has access to that, they would be able to interfere with the alerts, for example, that you wanted to push in this message queue, and they could like DDoS it or just remove the messages that would be interesting for a security practitioner. So that's the kind of things that we should care about. There are also some security things that we need to keep in mind.
Okay, well, I'll table that conversation for now. But, you know, as we do the MVC of this, if we could keep this in mind, you know, anything we can do to save ourselves rework later would be helpful. You know, and maybe some of that is just letting them do a manual deployment, you know, into the cluster and then connect that back with GitLab in some way. And then it doesn't matter what they're using for CI/CD or Auto DevOps or even for their SCM. All right, so point number 2 here, you know, some of the requirements have multiple solutions proposed. You know, do we really want to implement everything in the list that you put together, or, you know, for some of these, should we be picking one or the other where there's multiple technologies?
Yeah, in my opinion, we should like choose one and not implement the other one, or implement it after some time, not for the first iteration. So for active response blocking, okay, we can go with NAT and kubeless, or we can write something simple like that I presented on the demo, or use something that is already, it's not a part of Falco, but we have very small application. It's called Falco Sidekick, and we can extend it. It's just actually a HTTP server that like you need to authenticate to it, and then you can send events to it, and then it will like react, like let's say send a message to Slack or Teams, or send data to Datadog, or do a webhook, and we can extend it easily, or we can have our own solution. That shouldn't be a problem. So I don't believe we need to have an NATs in the first iteration and kubeless, because that's something that's really huge and that adds additional capabilities for GitLab. But managing that, deploying that will first of all increase the attack surface, as Philippe said, and also it will decrease increase our the work we need to do to accomplish that.
Okay, so it would, so if I understand it right, if the difference between our Go app and the NATS kubeless solution is NATS plus kubeless would give us just extra active response options, like what, you know, the ones you mentioned, sending to Slack or creating a webhook, things like that. So it just opens the door to more options than we would have with our simple Go app that we write ourselves.
That actually, yeah, that is true. So in my opinion, we just need to keep it simple. So the Go app, not use NATS and kubeless for now, but either go with Go app, or there's another solution that it was not listed. I discovered it yesterday. It's called Falco Sidekick. It's part of its own Falco repository. It has ability to output to Slack or Teams. I'll add it. Oh yeah, you've added it here. So but not go with Nats or Kubeless here, but rather one or like Go App or Falco Sidekick, and extend the Falco Sidekick to meet our needs, because right now Falco Sidekick does not support running like a bash script, and we actually, as the first iteration, I thought it would be nice to have it as Waza have it already. So whenever something is happening, you just run some script and you allow users to write their own rules and alerts what to do when some event is triggered.
Got it. So, you know, you sized the Go app at large, you sized Nats and Kubeless at, actually, I think you sized that one at medium. Let me double check. Where would we size the solution of Falco Sidekick?
I believe it will be similar. Like it should be M, and but Nats or Kubeless, it should be extra large.
With extra large.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, you're sizing that as the smallest out of all of them. Is that the one that you want to go with, or? I mean, we've got to pick one of these at the end of the day, I guess.
It's actually hard
to tell. Do you need to do some more research?
Because with our like simple Go app, okay, we're gonna maintain it. That will be application written by us, but we can keep it simple. With Falco Sidekick, if we have to extend it, and we're not sure if they'll accept our contribution, because that's I would say unusual to run a bash script in. So I'm not sure if they'll accept it. So I would go with our Go app, try to write it and test it. I don't believe it will be a lot of work. I just added it as L. We added as L because we need to create a Helm chart for it. We need to like maintain it, add tests for it, and so on. But at the same time, for Falco Sidekick, okay, we have lots of things already done for us, but then we need to extend it, and we need to decide if we're going to just fork it and add some additional functionalities to it, or we'll try to contribute to the community of Falco. So I don't know. What's your opinion, Zamir?
Sorry, I'm typing. I have a very hard time to sync up everything. That's why I'm a little bit quiet there. I didn't look into Falco Sidekick. For me, like just going back a little bit on the point, we have lots of solutions for the same requirement, more as an option. I hope that's very clear over there. It's not that we are going to implement all of them. And some of them are simple, but have more limitations. Some of them are more complex, take more time, but they cover more ground. So that's I think it's the main idea behind all of this.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
And in regards to Falco Sidekick, I didn't look into that. Sorry.
So, I mean, from my perspective, it seems like all three of these meet the requirements. So from my end, we could reasonably go with any of them. You know, if you tell me they're all equal, of course, I'm going to want the cheapest one. But other than that, like, I'm really looking to engineering to propose what we do here. You know, as long as everything meets the requirements on my end, you know, I don't really care too much which technology you pick. You know, it's you and your team that's going to need to maintain it in the long run, right?
So some questions. So the simple Go app, that would require the customer to write the script, the active response script in Go?
No, it can be like by default, it will be like just bash script. That's all.
Okay, so they have to write it in a bash script, and you know, writing things in bash scripts is not a huge lift, but it like doesn't have the things automatically built in. For example, the output to Slack or Teams.
Yeah,
exactly. Which by the way feels more to me like an alert than a log. So I'm not sure. Well, there's pros and cons of allowing that to happen in container. Behavior analytics a different way than other places, but I do like that there's more already available by default. But it would need to be extended to run a bash script.
I mean, is that something that we could add a Go app? You know, if we started with Sidekick now, could we use its webhook functionality to write a Go app that, you know, just listen to that webhook and then ran a bash script, so that way, we could just extend that with a Go script or a Go app down the road without having to contribute to the Sidekick project or have that merge request accepted by them.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think what we
Zamir and Alan,
go ahead.
we
please.
should have a meeting around this, because I have the feeling that we're going to duplicate some things that might already exist at GitLab. We already have some services to Slack users based on events. It's just that we don't have that event yet in GitLab. And I'm afraid that I'm thinking about this, a bit holistically. Like, if you have 10,000 applications deployed with GitLab, you will deploy like 10,000 Falco Sidekick if you want to have that feature, which is not the most efficient way. Like, if you want to update Falco Sidekick, you will need to do that 10,000 times. So
Yeah.
I wonder if we should start thinking about what we could reuse in the current architecture, because in my head, the difference between an alert and the log entry is kind of the same. If you use Splunk, for example, the only alerts that you're going to get are the log entries. You just define what makes a log entry an alert. That's why I was asking earlier. And from there, if you have this log entry, you can generate events. And from these events, you can decide to store that as a kind of issue so that you can comment and target milestones, etc. But you can also decide to have a kind of notification on Slack, and you have the whole loop that is done suddenly without implementing a lot of things. So that's probably going to be useful to have this conversation in the next days. What do you think?
Sorry, I think on all of these, where we want to where we need to make a decision on which technology, or at least which technology first, but it's probably mostly which one, is go into more detail on the pros and cons of each. If they all meet Sam's requirements, that's great. Some may meet them better than others, and some might be better, from an engineering perspective than others. So I think we'll want. I don't want to try to settle that today, because I think we won't get to other items in the list. But I think that's something we should analyze further. So maybe an action item for Alan and Zamir is to compare and contrast the differences between simple Go app, Nats and Kubeless, and Falco Sidekick in a little more detail. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, it's actually, yeah, definitely. It's all about what we would like to achieve with Active Response Engine. What kind of capabilities we would like to achieve? Would like to block the user from doing something, or react when or we just want to send some alerts and
I think it's both. I think we want to be able to notify somebody of something, and we want to be able to take, I wouldn't say block, because that implies inline. This is after the thing has already occurred, but take some action to, for example, might be turn off a container might be an action, or kill a process on a specific container, or something like that. I think it's both kinds of things are in scope. Would you agree, Sam?
Yeah, so I put a short list up here, just added it, at the end of point A. It's certainly not a comprehensive list, but, things to think about that we'll probably want to do down the road.
And I think we also don't want to assume that the user can or will want to, even if they can write a script to take action. They may want, like, for some common things like terminate a container, or send an email, or send a Slack notification, is to have those things very easy, so they don't have to write. Even though they could write a script to do that, they may not want to write a script to do that. Or even if
we may have some
okay
scripts pre-written.
Yeah, or yeah, exactly what Sam said. Or we have some scripts pre-written to do things like that. So it's still run a script, but we provide examples for them to, templates for them to use, perhaps. But yeah, no, this is a great list. And Zamir and Alan, do you have what you need to kind of go a level deeper on the pros and cons of each?
Yeah, definitely. But knowing that, and what Philippe said about integrations with Slack that we currently have on GitLab, I believe Falco Sidekick might be just a simpler, better choice, because we can use the webhooks, and that will trigger, I believe, Slack notification from GitLab, and so that will be easier for us to use it, and we'll already have all default things that we'd like to have, like sending an email or doing other things. And then we will just need to extend it to run some bash scripts. And that's all what we need. You can do that either by extending Sidekick by itself, or by changing or by creating some application that will simply react based on webhook.
Cool.
Okay. So for the sake of time, I want to keep going through these. So malware scanning, the GitLab schedule pipeline, I'm a little bit concerned about that because when I talked with customers, I got the sense that they wanted to protect against malware introduced after the container was started. And I fully understand that given all of the other protections that we have in place, maybe we have adequately protected against that malware scenario, but still there's customer desire to have malware scanning, to just as call it what you will, right? An emotional thing, an emotional security blanket, a checkbox requirement. There still is a desire to have that capability. Looks like Thiago said AppArmor is a mitigation strategy here. I'm not sure if he's just referring to the protections that, would still protect against malware being run, is what I'm guessing. But I get the sense that customers, and we can verify this as time goes on because we still have a while before we'll get to actually implementing this. But from the information I do have, it sounds like they do actually want malware scanning in running containers. So that would effectively make that solution not an option, which leaves us with either ClamAV or Dagda, if I'm saying that right.
So here's some of the discussion around this, and I'm still not convinced of this, but Philippe and or Zamir and or Alan tell me I'm wrong, which is fine because I likely am. But that the opinion is we don't need malware scanning if we have application whitelisting. And the reason is that if we explicitly define what applications can run, that will not include malware. Of course, it's only going to be things known that should be run. So the reason why I don't necessarily agree is I think a concerted attacker may find a way to leverage something else that already is in place and make it so that they can insert malware into that or attach malware to that so that the application still is allowed, but that it has malware attached, maybe.
And even if that wasn't the case, malware scanning tends to be a checkbox regulatory and compliance requirement.
And not all customers are going to configure their whitelists or use that feature, right?
Right.
Yeah. So why we can't do it why I believe we can't do it in the pipeline is that malware can be inserted after the container is already built and running. So I think doing it in the pipeline is great because you want to detect it there, but there are definitely techniques to, after a container is running, inserting malware into it and trying to get it to run. So that being said,
I mean, it looks like ClamAV and Dagda both seem to meet the product requirement. So again, my question to Zamir and Alan is, is there a preference between the two? Obviously Dagda gets us somewhere with vulnerability scanning as well, but it was larger than ClamAV. At that point, I'd become a little bit indifferent as to the solution.
ClamAV is going to be strictly for malware detection, and it's a very light Helm chart. Dagda seems to be a little bit cumbersome. I heard people saying that they have a couple of issues when they install that in the cluster. It covers way more ground as it integrates with Falco, but it would require a little bit more digging over there. And also they don't have a Helm chart, so we would have to build and maintain one from our side. So I think that if the focus is, I'm not saying that we should, just say that if the focus is moving forward with malware scanning, I think it might be good for the first iteration to just use ClamAV and then see if we want to go ahead with Dagda later on.
And Dagda scope, I wasn't familiar with it. It's much wider than just malware, just reading up on it. It does, like you mentioned, vulnerability detection, and it looks actually at what packages are on the device, or sorry, on the container, and what vulnerabilities are in them, et cetera. So I think, and ClamAV has been out there a very long time. that may be a good thing or maybe a bad thing. It's definitely mature. It may be too mature and maybe it doesn't work that well in a containerized environment, or maybe it does. But yeah, I would say based on that, Dagda is more than what we need for this, and ClamAV may be more stable for this usage. But that doesn't mean Dagda is bad. Actually, Dagda might be great just for a different set of requirements. But that's just first glance from looking at the notes here in the website. I don't necessarily want to make a decision here unless, Alan and Zamir and Philippe, you're good with making a decision right now.
Yeah, actually Dagda is using ClamAV under the hood. So Dagda it's not.
Well, that kind of decides it then, right?
Yeah, it's
because
not something that they're doing by their own. It's simply they just take applications that already exist and build it into single integrated tool. That's all.
Okay.
And I believe, in my opinion, by playing with it, it's not stable yet to the point that it's easy to be used. But that's something that maybe we could help to stabilize it, or
since
or
ClamAV
something
is
like
how
that.
Dagda does malware scanning, it makes sense to consider Dagda for something else. So, question for ClamAV: how does it scan the file systems for the containers? It doesn't have, it's not we don't have to actually run a program on each container, right? It scans the file system separately, so it doesn't have to touch. It doesn't have to be. The containers don't need to know that ClamAV is running. Is that accurate?
Yeah, actually, it's not something like it's not a magic thing. Actually, you have to mount some volumes that are available on the node, or you need to mount the volumes that are available in different place in your cluster. It's like that depends what you have selected, and then it will simply run it like you normally would run ClamAV on your
Okay.
Mac.
Yeah, so you're mounting the volumes. That's great. Because you don't have to. The container does not need to be aware that ClamAV needs to run or give it permissions or run a program on each container. So just for Sam's to make sure, Sam. So what this will do is this will periodically. It's going to periodically scan the volumes, the file systems. It will not scan when the program tries to run. It will scan periodically. So that malware.
Yeah, that's understood.
Okay, good.
That's okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
And it will scan all volumes. I know we were talking before about different file systems inside Kubernetes, some that are local to the container, others that may be mounted. Is it going to be able to scan everything would be the other requirement? Or are there file systems that would not be scanned or be able to be scanned?
This is going to depend on the settings that we do, for example, whitelisting and all of this. Because, for example, if we don't allow the scanner to run or something like this, then we are going to kind of bite us back.
Sure.
There are two strategies. One strategy is to let ClamAV run inside the container. The other one is to map the container volume back to the node and run ClamAV from the node. So that I'm not sure exactly which one would be the best to that. I need to run that. I haven't run it yet, but those would be the options in my opinion. Maybe Alan look more.
Okay, but either way, any file volumes that the container has access to, we can scan all of those. Is that a fair statement? Okay, then in that case, from my end, from everything I've heard, like from a product perspective, I do not have a preference between ClamAV or Dagda, and I think it's the same for vulnerability scanning for the two options we have there. So it really seems like, in my mind, this is an engineering choice of do you want to go with Dagda, which you sized as a large, or do you want to do ClamAV plus, GitLab scheduled pipelines to cover vulnerability scanning, which was a medium plus a small. Again, looking at size like either a large or medium plus a small, for both of them, I feel like I don't have a strong opinion between the two, and either of those meet customer requirements. So whichever solution you want to go forward with in engineering, I'm okay with.
Okay. So the first iteration, what I would do is do what we already have. So we have already scheduled pipeline, like pipeline schedules, and so we just need to make sure that user knows about it, because I was not aware until I look into the documentation, and I believe as a part of our page or somewhere that where we gonna list all things that we already have, we need to be able to help users configure it. So let's say like automated templates or something like that that will help help customers run those tests periodically, and that's how we could achieve that as a first iteration. And then starting from that, we'll definitely have time and do more to understand either ClamAV or Dagda. We'll have to try it. And how it works with what we have and with Falco, and Dagda should work with Falco because it was designed to work with Falco. But anyway, I do believe we could start with something simple first.
Okay, that sounds good. Philippe, you had a comment?
Yeah, I'm not sure to understand what's the advantage of having Dagda, because it seems to me like a very heavy solution. It requires MongoDB, it requires some Python, and actually, I think it's doing a lot of things, like it's running dependency check and retire.js to do also dependency scanning on the containers, and we just hear about the malware scanning. So if it's just to run ClamAV, what prevents us from running ClamAV directly from a shell script that would be running in a pod in the cluster, which would be a lot lighter than Dagda. I understand we don't. Yeah.
I believe we were considering Dagda because it also has the vulnerability scanning, and that would serve us. I don't believe we have other tool that can run and running container and check for vulnerabilities. At least I was not able to find it.
Yeah, but do you need to do that at the runtime? Because we already do that during the pipeline before pushing the container to the Kubernetes cluster. We have something equivalent to dependency check, which is Gymnasium. We have retire.js already. So these dependencies should not change at runtime, and if they change,
I kind of disagree. I think they can change because well, maybe I disagree. Dependency check also checks for things that are not part of the application the customer built. It's the operating system itself. It looks at all packages installed, not just ones that are part.
No, dependency check is only going to check for the dependency files.
That's correct. I'm wrong about that.
We do that with container scanning. So we have something based on Claire, which is
so maybe
Clar, actually.
Claire is the way to go for this. They should, similar to malware scanning, is that it should be checked during the pipeline runs, but that we can't assume that that something is different. Or, something is not changed since the pipeline run, and we want to scan as well the running containers. And we should use, when appropriate, which will often be the case, but maybe not always be the case, whatever Secure is using to do this similar functionality.
They will use that, and if something has to change during runtime, it's going to get caught by the active response blocking. So
just one
to consider.
Just one thing, guys. So we are talking about going first with ClamAV instead of Dagda, right? Or did I hear it wrong?
Yes.
Okay.
It sounds like that's the engineering preference.
Yeah.
No,
we kind of went off topic a bit, which is okay.
No, sorry, just my brain is delayed. That's why I don't know if it's my brain delayed or if you guys are talking.
Yeah.
No, just playing the devil's advocate here.
Call that out explicitly. So if we're going with ClamAV and not Dagda, then for vulnerability scanning, it sounds like we're leaning towards, we just go down the route of using the existing secure functionality, right? With the GitLab schedule pipeline.
Yes and no. So what I'm saying is what Dagda is doing, half of it is done by Secure already. The thing that we don't do is the malware scanning during runtime, and that could be done by a simple pod that we would write ourselves and deploy to the cluster directly. like any other pod. That would be a lot lighter than what I see here, which is a a Python server using MongoDB and probably some other dependencies.
Mhm.
I'm trying to keep that as lighter as possible, and I see
Do
that
we
it supports
know-
only a few base images.
Do we know what we want to know?
The ClaimAV has a Helm chart, official Helm chart. So then it does the pod with, I think, a demo set for us automatically.
Okay.
Just with ClaimAV, nothing else.
So do we know what we need to know at this point? Do we want to look into things more? Do we want to test, do some testing more on the vulnerability scanning side? Or do we know, is it clear which direction we want to go? Or do we want to do some more analysis first?
I would say we know what we want to explore, unless Alan or Zemir
What we want to
have a
explore
strong...
or what we want, so we're not ready to decide. We know what we want to explore.
It's-
Which
But there's
is,
at least a proposal, right, or a recommendation.
and what is that recommendation? For vulnerability scanning?
Do we have to decide right now?
No.
That's my question.
Are we ready to decide right now? That's my question.
Okay.
It sounds like no. And the potentials are Dagda or Clark?
No, Dagda or something in-house. That would be based on ClaimAV.
Yeah.
Like a
Wait,
Helm
sorry,
chart.
for vulnerability scanning. I switched to vulnerability scanning. For the next, sorry, I was already on the next item. Maybe
Sorry, that's me lagging. Okay, I'm
yeah.
doing like
So
Zemir.
for vulnerability scanning, is it clear where engineering feels we should, okay, I'm seeing the notes that Sam's writing. So we'll not use Dagda, but plan to use Explorer using Claire or GitLab scheduled pipeline, which so we still want to research more, which is just fine, of course. I just want to understand more. Is Alan and Zemir, that makes sense? Are you on the same page?
Yeah, like the first iteration still, we'll have to keep it like on GitLab scheduled pipeline. We'll reuse what we have. That will solve most of the issues, because usually the vulnerabilities are introduced either during like building of the container, or after some time when you have a running container and there was some vulnerability found for the package that you had already installed in your running container. So if we'll just run scheduled pipeline with security scans like every day or every week, we'll be able to notify customers about that, and they'll be able to update rebuild the Docker image, and they'll be able to redeploy the application with no vulnerabilities in it. And that will solve most of the issues. And then we'll decide if we want to have like real-time protection against that. So whenever something is installed, or it shouldn't happen like during during cluster runtime. It should happen only when you build a container. During container runtime. But yeah, I believe it will solve most of the problems. We'll have to revisit that after first iteration.
Okay, so we made a decision on the malware scanning solution. We have a strong direction, although not 100% final, for vulnerability scanning, and the active response and blocking still needs some more research. Just to sum it up, right? So again, for the sake of time, I want to move through here. If we want to shift to point 3, if you want to take a look, I've attempted to prioritize these based off of our discussion today, as well as the sizes that you've given me, the priorities that I've heard from customers. Does anything in here not look right to the group? Let's put it that way. Or is anything in here unclear?
Well, I want to hear from Alan and Zemir first before I have comments. Does this look about right, Alan and Zemir?
Yeah, for me it looks right. I'm thinking about GitLab scheduled pipelines. If we should, like in terms of priority, it's fine. But I believe we could do it a little bit earlier, because I don't believe there will be lots of work for the engineering team. So we could ask someone from someone that could help us with the documentation and maybe document it better. And like we just need to add a link to the documentation whenever we decide to put information about this container behavior analytics. So then it will be, I believe, fine, all good.
Okay.
So if
I'm
it's
not
more of
convinced
like an extra small instead of a small, maybe I would move that up like to priority 5, put it between 4 and 5 where those
Are
sit
you
right
talking about
now.
for vulnerabilities? Well, you're talking about
Yeah.
doing the documentation. I'm not there yet, but before we do that, let's run it by, I want to think about it more, and well, we can move it there if that's where everybody else wants to move it. I think that's fine. Just, you know, this is all still tentative till, it's all still draft, right? And it'll change over time iteratively, of course, but also want, Arthur and Thiago to give them a chance to weigh in on everything, not just this. But yeah, I'm fine with making that change for now. One thing I saw in here that just jumped out at me, statistics, and from 2 aspects, just things to consider, is that, you know, it'd be great if the way we compute statistics for container behavior analytics is very similar and leverages as much as possible as how we do it for WAF and for container network, right? So we're not rebuilding that each time. The other separate topic is, I know we're really challenged with getting overall metrics, kind of North Star style metrics on numbers of whatevers for each set of components, you know, whether it's WAF or container network, and probably for this is, so let's keep that in mind for this, that has been a challenge that I think we're surely going to overcome, but let's keep that in mind. So we design this to take advantage of the best practices we learned for the others. I see Alan, I see you nodding. I know it's been a bane of your existence lately, and also Arthur's when he's working on it for Cilium. So more just a comment, not in general, that this brought up, not specifically on the roadmap.
Yeah, no, those are good things to call out. You know, metrics, we're going to want to get those probably as part of priority 4 at that same time. And statistics, we're not talking about network traffic here. So statistics for this is going to look different. You know, I don't have a vision for what that will look like yet. I'll have to work with Andy on that. But, you know, the problem to be solved is the same, which is at a high level, can I just look at it and know that the thing is working and see at a really high level how much stuff it's doing for me, blocking or stopping or whatever. This is kind of a stopgap until, you know, I didn't put like alert visualization on this list because that's a little bit out of scope, but, you know, until we get a full like alerts page where you can actually see the things that are being blocked coming through in an alert, you know, we have to provide some kind of visibility just to know it's on and working. All right, so we've got 5 minutes left. I think for the rest of the time, I'd like to share the concepts that we have around policy management. I'm expecting that to take well over 5 minutes. So if anyone has a hard stop, feel free to just drop off. You don't need to say anything. You know, this will probably take 30 minutes at least. So if you have time, great. If not, that's totally fine. The meeting's recorded, so you can always go back and watch later. Or if you have individual questions, I'm happy to talk with anyone one-on-one on it too.
If I'm the only one who has to drop, then I'd recommend continue. If there's others that need to drop, it might be worthwhile to schedule a follow-up session. So I do need to drop, but where's everybody else? You have more time? Or
I have kids to feed here. Not so sure.
Philippe, before you go, can I just clarify? You mentioned that you'd like to have a meeting to discuss a couple of the points. Would you mind saying again which points would you like more or less to discuss, so then we don't make a decision that we might have to
all of them.
That's a classic Philippe answer if I ever heard one.
I think we can have a weekly meeting just on these topics. And I just make it clear, I don't want to be a bottleneck here. I'm just playing the devil's advocate role. So I'm kind of heads up and make sure that the whole picture still makes sense. So if you're taking decision without me in the loop, that's fine. That's on me. I should be more available for that kind of topics. I should be in the issues. So I don't want to block you, but if you want to talk about these topics and you want some more insights, make sure that it's going to fit with some other things like what we do in Secure, or maybe in Configure or whatever. I'm here. I use my time. I will be happy to have some brainstorming sessions with you if you want to validate a solution that you're not sure about. If you're sure that that is the right solution, I will trust you. Just
So I saw some thumbs up. So Philippe and Zamir and Alan, are you able to stick around for longer, or do you need to drop? You can stick around. So I'd say so
I'll go ahead. It's recorded. You're welcome to watch it. And like I said, if you want to sync up with me one-on-one or schedule more time, I'm more than happy to do it.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, so that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Before I go into these details too much, I want to say a few things. One, this is a very early concept, right? So we've got this we're just working through it at a high level. So there's going to be lots of holes in it for sure. You know, we really were only just working on it this week. I don't have mocks or anything like that yet. And the other thing, just to comment on this before we dive into it, is we're designing right now with Andy, we're trying to work out the long-term vision. Like, where do we want policy management to be a year from now? And then we can take that and back into, you know, how do we get there iteratively? But you know, there's going to be a lot of things in here that, you know, we may not get to right away, and that's okay. But I just wanted to share that longer term vision with you, again, to make sure that technologies that we're choosing are going to be able to support that in the end. So the initial part of the workflow that we're thinking about is policies, as you create them in GitLab, would be tied either to the instance, group, project, or environment. Now, at the end of the day, policies are actually applied at the environment level, but if you created a project type policy, it would apply to all of the environments inside of that project, for example, but it applies to a group level policy would apply to all environments in all projects in that group. So it still normalizes down to the environment level is where the policy is actually being applied at the end of the day. But you could create higher scoped policies. If I wanted a policy to be applied to all environments across my entire instance, I could create it up at the instance level and have that pushed down, you know, to everything in my entire GitLab instance. So that's really the first part is, you know, where you start for this policy creation. You know, the work that Arthur's doing right now is really environment focused, but we would potentially add these other capabilities later. And as I go, if you have questions, just stop me.
Okay. Can you overwrite the policy in group? So let's say you have one policy, for instance, and you'd like to overwrite one part of the policy in group or project. Are you allowed to do it or not?
So the instance level policy would be applied no matter what. You could create another policy to add to that behavior. So the policies are additive. I think the only time there's a conflicting action is in like allow or block decisions. And in that case, the block action would take precedence. So if any policy anywhere triggers a block action, then it's going to block regardless of the other policies. Other than that, I don't think there is any conflict in the actions that would be taken by the policies. So they're purely additive.
Okay.
So the answer would be no. At the group level, you could not disable an instance level policy. You would have to go up to the instance to disable that, or you know, to pick which groups you want it to apply to. The next part is we're going to have different types of policies. So you know, some, and I'm struggling with the terminology here, so that's one piece that we're still working out. But a real-time container policy, some would be scheduled scan policies for things like your malware scans or your vulnerability scans, or even scheduling secure scans. You know, if you're writing secure policies to run, you know, in the pipeline, that's the type of policy that you would create. Or GitLab user policy, which would be like Matt Wilson's UEBA category. So that's out of scope for us, but we're trying to design this in a way that you can have lots of different types of policy in here. So that we end up having one place in GitLab to do policy instead of five policy screens. And then the way it would work is it's just a big if-then statement. So, here we've got, rules that would be added and then actions that can be taken when those rule conditions are met. We've got keyword rules, regular expression rules, and volumetric rules. We could add to that list in the future, but that's just sort of, initial starting point. And, in here, you would just craft like a sentence, if network traffic is inbound or outbound to the cluster, or the namespace if it's a Cilium rule, and one or more keywords are found anywhere in the port. So the keyword 8080 is found in the port. That would be one component of the rule. The idea is that you could have lots of these rules that you can combine with ands and ors. So you can say, if the port is 8080 and and the IP address is, this IP address that I don't like, then block the traffic. So you can combine multiple rules together as long as they're of the same type. And then more applicable for what you're working on, we would have rules like, if a process starts in a container and, associated with an image, a container that's associated built from this image or a container that's part of this namespace, maybe you would have other criteria here to filter on which containers you want to trigger on, but where the keywords are this, it's found in the process name, the process path, the hash of the process. Maybe you would add signature, if the process is signed by the certificate, then it's okay. If it's not, then block it. But you see the rough idea here is to take this to a point where the user is not going in and saying, okay, I'm going to write an AppArmor policy, or I'm going to write a Cilium policy, or I'm going to write a mod security policy. They don't have to think about that. On the UI, we want to abstract that from the user so that they write a policy based off of what they want to accomplish. And then we translate that policy on the back end to figure out which technologies we need to give policy to do the job. Let me stop there for a minute because that's probably a lot. All right, well, I'll keep going. So
that's going to be a that's going to be a one-way policy generator, if I understand well. Like that's going to generate the policies, but we're not reading, if there is an existing file, for example, we're not reading that from the file, right? The other way around.
Yeah, so that's a good question, right? Like, what if somebody goes into Kubernetes and they add policies on their own? It would be great if, again, the long-term vision here, where engineering cost is no object. I would love it to be two-way, so that, out of this, you would have a configuration file or a YAML file that gets generated, and you could either edit this in the UI and it would generate your one or more files to be applied to the technologies, or you could edit the YAML file directly and you would see that reflected in the UI. So ideally it would be a two-way thing. But again, we're designing for the end state. I understand that we may not get there immediately.
Okay, thanks.
And then schedule type rules. So you could come in here and schedule, scan all images, scan just running containers, for malware or vulnerable packages or vulnerable configurations, and then you schedule it, right? How often do you want it to run and when do you want it to start? And then based off of this, so it's an if-then statement, just like you can have multiple if criteria combined with ands and ors, you can have multiple actions, just to add some that we talked about today, like send a Slack message. So, the allow or block would be required based off of the rules that you have in your if portion of the statement. So, if you have a network traffic rule, then you need to say either allow or block the network traffic. You have to pick one or the other. So these would be required rules depending on what's in the if part of the sentence. These would be optional rules that could be added on as well. So I want to also generate a log, also generate alert. Maybe I also want to block this IP address, add this to deny list, terminate the pod, and so forth. Send an email message. We could add to this list as time goes on, but this is a work in progress. I mean, I was working on this even just yesterday, so I'm sure there are things here that we're still missing, but I just wanted to communicate the high-level concept around what we're thinking for policy management. So I'll go ahead and share out this mural link. I'll add that to the doc too, so that you can access it and Lynn can access it since he had to drop off. I mean, I'm sure we have things to refine around the details of all of these drop-down options, but from a high-level conceptual level of abstracting the policy management away from the technologies, is that something that you feel like would be possible, with the technologies that we've picked?
Yeah, I believe so. Are we gonna save those policies? Are we not gonna use only UI to edit them, right? We're gonna save them somewhere. Are we gonna use YAML files as well? So we'll allow users to automate writing policies if they want, or something like that?
So, I mean, I don't want to speak too much to the implementation details. I know Arthur's thinking he's going to need to start saving these to the GitLab database at some point. What the format of that is, if he's just saving the raw YAML, or what that looks like. I don't know that that's all been defined. So, that's still something that we need to figure out.
Okay. But and from the product perspective, you will be allowed to export the policy to some file?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we definitely want to be able to export and import. And let me show you another mock if I can find it. Or actually, there's a better way to find this.
I assume at some point we're going to have some kind of marketplace where you're going to just click the button and it will add policies to your cluster.
Never say marketplace in GitLab.
Okay.
Is that a taboo word? We would like community contributions to our list of policies. Would be a great thing to have. We'll put it that way. Give me just a minute here. Let me see if I can find this.
While you're searching for this, I just want to jump on that file generation discussion because I'm a big advocate of having files in the end for good reason. Is the problem? One of the problems that we have introduced with the UI configuration is that we don't control exactly who is doing what. So we're introducing not only some permission issues, authorization issues, but also tracking, logging, etc. Who is doing what is getting a problem. We have that problem in Secure already. And having file would be a good way to overcome this kind of limitations that the UI has. Like if we have that in the UI and in the end, that's going to be a file. So the outcome of this is a merge request where this merge request is going through the whole workflow that you have usually in your project, and you're set because you have everything to track that, you have all the permissions. And if that file is, for example, a single name file, we can have that in the code owners, for example, and make sure that someone specific in the team, like the security champion, is required to approve any change to that file. So without a lot of hassle, without a lot of work, we can use what we have already we can leverage what's existing to achieve all of this. And in the end, the only thing that we have to do is this UI to generate the file, which is not too much work in the end. And we could detect that file, just to finish that. We could detect in a pipeline, we have rules, so rule systems now in the pipelines. We can create a rule saying if that file is changing, then run this job. We can have that. The only limitation that we have with this is we don't have this job in the user pipeline generally. So we might have to create some other pipelines that would be only for us. This is something that I code Ghost Pipelines. I invite you to take a look at the issue. It's already in the doc. We'll put that in the chat as well. That could be a solution. Having a way to run pipelines for the user without flooding the users, without showing these pipelines all the times. It could be used for malware scanning, for all that kind of things that we need to do in background.
Yeah, so you might want to talk with Arthur, you know, on that and how he's, what his thoughts are on architecting this policy management in the back end. Yeah, I would just encourage you to talk with him and you know, sort that out. You know, again, from the user's perspective, you know, so here's a mock that Becca created, and it obviously does not have like the full workflow that we're designing out here, but it shows that, you know, as you're editing things in the UI, that would be reflected as well, you know, so that you can see the code and the UI side by side. And ideally, you would be able to edit the code and hit validate rule and have that populate the UI, or you can edit the UI and have that populate the code. So, it, you know, in a perfect world, it would go both ways. And, you know, if I logged into Kubernetes directly and created a policy outside of GitLab, you know, bypass GitLab, went around GitLab, put something in Kubernetes, added a policy manually to AppArmor or what have you, ideally we would be able to read that policy in and also just show it in our list of policies. You know, it's not going to be, it would just be like an environment level policy by default because, you know, we haven't tied it to the instance or group level or anything like that, but we should be able to read that policy in and display it as well. So, you know, again, long-term vision here, but I would love for it to be able to go both ways so that they can pick how they manage their policies. And they may have multiple files here too, right? Because we've got different configurations for Cilium versus AppArmor. So they may end up with, you know, a separate file for each, and that's okay if, you know, the text editor is technology based, as long as the UI piece is use case focused. All right, well, that's everything I had to share around policy. I'll add these 2 links to the document and I'll go ahead and post this. I think we can post it publicly on YouTube.
Good stuff.